Hello and welcome to another episode of I Guess I'll Do It with Pat House, a comedy podcast where I talk to comedians about what got them into stand-up. Today I have a very special guest. He's been at it since the 70s. He is from the Philadelphia area, such as myself, travels all over the country. Today I have the hilarious Gordon Douglas. What's up? Thank you for being here.
Hey, Pat. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
I love the comedy and I love to chat.
Absolutely. We're happy to have you here. You are one of the very few guests I've had on this podcast that I have never met.
No, our paths crossed through a friend, Marty Jeffers, and a golf course, I believe.
Yep. Marty Jeffers, great guy. But we have a ton of mutual friends, and you and myself are both from the Philadelphia area. I think the only other guest I've had on my podcast who I have not met was Tom Dreesen.
Oh, one of my favorites growing up.
So great, so great. Such a super funny guy and super, super nice. I mean, his stories about opening for Sinatra were just...
Right. I
mean, he was doing stand-up for 50,000 people some nights. That's wild.
Yes. I've had some big audience, but nothing like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a whole different world. But I'm happy to have you here because I love comedy history, and I love Philadelphia comedy history because for a while, probably when you first started, we didn't even have a comedy club. So I would love to hear how you first got started in stand-up and where you were performing around here in the 70s. Sure.
Well, I met our mutual friend, Marty Jeffers, at Williamson College of Trades, in those days, Williamson Trade School. And I graduated in carpentry and actually went to work in a power plant down at Gulf Oil in South Philadelphia, right at the Penrose Bridge.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yep. So as I graduated, I was coaching Little League. And, that first day of tryouts, everybody gets a number. You get 3 throws, 3 swings. And being the new coach, I got all the short, fat, chubby kids that nobody wanted. And it was a setup. And one of those kids, as we gave out the hats and the shirts, I saw this big purple Lincoln Continental pull up, and this lady got out of the car, and I recognized her immediately as someone I had seen many times on Johnny Carson, on The Tonight Show, on the Mike Douglas Show. Her name was Julie DeJohn, and she was a singing comedian born in Chester. But as we travel, I don't tell people Chester. I just tell people I grew up in Philly. And
I'm from Springfield, but it's so much easier to just say Philly.
Yes, exactly. So I went over and introduced myself to Julie, and I told her, hey, I saw you on TV. You're really funny. People tell me I'm kind of funny. So how do you get into this comedy thing? And she told me to give her a tape of my act. Well, I didn't have an act. I just had a bunch of stories I told at parties when everyone else was making out and I couldn't get a date. I just went around and tried to make people laugh. But I bought a Radio Shack cassette recorder and went down in my basement, told every funny story I could, and gave it to her. And
wow,
she called
alone
me
in the basement?
Yes.
So you did a set for yourself, essentially.
This is what I do. And she asked me to come over her house and handed me my cassette and said, Gordon, this is really cute. And I started to smile, and she said, people don't pay for cute. She said, but you have a gift. I can tell it's there. You need to take this 30-minute cassette down and get me 6 minutes of gold out of it. And she worked with me for several months on how to set up a joke, how to exaggerate a joke, the proper gestures, how to transition, make it into it. It was really a mentoring before mentoring was even a word. And I went and I watched her. She kept telling me, just come and watch what I do. Watch what I do. And I went to places like Palumbo's nightclub and the Latin Casino. There were dinner theaters in those days. There weren't comedy clubs. It was dinner theaters, beautiful places, velvet curtains, many times a band or orchestra behind you. And she said, when you're ready, I'm going to have you open for me. About 6 months later, she said, I think you're ready. Got a show this Friday night with Bill Haley in the Comets. Bill Haley in the Comets.
Oh, cool.
Your younger audiences might remember 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock rock, right? The theme song for Happy Days. And he also grew up in Chester. Bill Haley was a Chester boy.
Yep.
And so my first show ever was at a nightclub with all professional entertainers, where one of the members of Bill Haley's group had passed away, and they were doing a tribute to Rudy Pompili, the saxophone player. And that was my beginning. And for the next 2 years, Julie took me around everywhere she could. She had opened for Sinatra a few times. She was always a regular at Palumbo's. She did her own show. I believe she was on Mike Douglas 74 times.
Oh, wow.
And she was a large woman that combined singing, beautiful singing. She did a lot of jingles, commercials. Some of your listeners may remember double your pleasure, double your fun with Double Mint, Double Mint. Well, that was Julie. She sang commercial. Yeah, she sang commercial jingles. She sang Broadway numbers. And in between songs, she did some really, really funny stand-up. Just had a great 1 hour act that made her a regular in this area.
So you basically had this is the equivalent of a personal trainer, but for stand-up. You had one-on-one sessions with somebody helping you.
Yep, at her kitchen table for 6 months.
Were you nervous for that very first time doing it when she asked you to open for her, or were you excited and ready?
Absolutely panicked. Never been on front of a stage in that setting before. In fact, it's a chapter in my book. I wrote a book called Growth Spurts and Growing Pains, The Struggles of a Skinny Stud Muffin. And how Stephen Wright got his thing, right? He apparently, his first show, he blanked and he froze, and that deadpan delivery came out of that experience. I came out and I got maybe 200-300 people in a club, and I'm looking out and I see celebrities everywhere that are there to remember Bill Haley and the Comets and this guy. And I came out, and as a young 20-year-old, I said, I'm honored to be here tonight. Thank you for making my stage debut, to honor an award-winning songwriter, an international musician, a great guy. And then I blanked. I forgot the name of the guy that we were honoring that night. And behind me is a 4 foot by 6 foot picture of him. And across the stage in big letters is Rudy Pompili Night. And slow motion, I turned around and read his name, and the people roared because I was busting on the dead guy who was paying for the party.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah, it is a very scary feeling when you are on stage and forget somebody's name. Yes. I was brand new to emceeing, and I was working with a comic. I was bringing the headliner up, and I totally blanked on his name. We had worked together before, but I just had a brain fart, and I had nothing. So I said, give it up for the wait staff 3 separate times. You guys having fun? I'm getting them clapping, and I'm having a panic attack. My back is sweating. I can feel my chest turn red. And I look at the table in front of me, and I see a table tent, a piece of paper folded in a triangle, right. And I see the headliner's name, and I'm like, oh, thank heavens. So I got saved just by scanning the room in a complete panic attack.
Yeah.
You just mentioned Stephen Wright. He is one of my favorite comics of all time. I remember seeing him on Letterman when I was a kid. I loved his appearances on there. And I just saw him a few months ago, and he at the Keswick in Glenside, Pennsylvania. And he did 90 minutes of incredible one-liners. Old stuff, new stuff. He absolutely knocked it out of the park. Is he one of your favorites as well?
Yes. It is not my style, but certainly I love listening to him. I've never seen it.
Not my style either, but he's the master of the deadpan one-liner.
And one of the guys that I've been mentoring, his name is Just Todd. He went up to see that same show. And I said, I've seen him on Letterman many times. I check him out on YouTube. He's brilliant, but I can't imagine listening to him for an hour. And he said, Gordon, he did 90 minutes.
It flew by.
And it flew by. I admire the creativity, the writing, and to take that persona and make it into an entire act. Well, just brilliant stuff.
So take me back to your early days again. Who were your comedic influences at the time? I mean, if you did this set in your basement, so clearly you're into stand-up or comedy in general. What was really appealing to you when you were getting started?
Sure.
Comics or movies or who?
Sure. Well, growing up, I loved Jerry Lewis movies, and I was, of course, Ed Sullivan was a regular. So all the Ed Sullivan guys and the Milton Berles and the George Burns I never thought Bob Hope was extremely funny, but I was so moved by what he did for the soldiers over the years.
Yeah, the USO stuff.
That I began reading his biography, and I ended up meeting some of his writers. And it was really through them that I was invited out to Hollywood. One of his writers who just passed away in the last month, Gene Perrette, absolute genius in writing. He was Bob Hope's lead writer for 25 years. He did the Carol Burnett show. He did the Dean Martin roast. And it was through a friend of a friend in good old South Philly that said, hey, I know this guy, Gene. He writes for Bob Hope and he works with Carol Burnett. You ought to get in touch. and I sent him a letter. I sent him my little cassette, and never thinking I'd hear back, because 99 times out of 100, you never hear back from these wonderful connections.
That's always been the case. I feel like that's always been the case of show business from day one. I'm
Yes.
sure back in vaudeville, people were writing letters to carnies and hill people trying to get gigs and not hearing back.
Yeah, here's my CD. Here's what I do. That kind of stuff. But yeah, so I got a 6-page letter back from him at NBC within a couple of weeks, and they invited me to come and audition for a show. They invited me to come and do some stuff and meet some people, because they. I'm getting ahead of myself. My influences, the Ed Sullivan comedians. I love Red Skelton. I love Jonathan Winters. I love the Dick Van Dyke Show. That combination of physical comedy, one-liners, storytelling. I liked all of that, and I loved to laugh. I was one of those silly kids that just always liked to laugh. But when I was getting started, and people on your podcast cannot see me, but I'm told I have a rather strong resemblance to a comedian from South Philly named David Brenner. And
you actually do. And what is so funny is I've been on your website a couple times, and I thought that every single time I seen you on your homepage, I'm like, this guy really does look like David Brenner. Yeah. Did you know David?
Yes, many times. I actually won a David Brenner lookalike contest in 1976.
How many people were in this contest?
About seven. And one was black and one was a woman. I think they just wanted to be on TV.
Oh, that's hysterical. I went to Temple University, and I know that David Brenner did, and so did Bob Saget. So a handful of really funny comics came out of Temple University.
And our buddy Tommy Moore taught comedy there at good old Temple. So I met David Brenner several times, and in the early days when you only have 6-7 minutes of material, I would do David Brenner impersonations. And then one day when I met him in person, his agent came over to me as manager and said, "Hey, Gordon, the world doesn't need 2 David Brenners. Do your own act." It's like I was starting to get some attention and starting to make some money. And they weren't real happy with that. But David was always super gracious, great advice, always ready to help young comedians. And I was actually supposed to be with him the day before he died. And I had called up and got the call that he had passed away. It was very sad.
I never had the chance to cross paths with him. We have a bunch of mutual friends and that kind of stuff. And I've always been a fan, but he and I never crossed paths. So unfortunately, I'll never get the chance. But I've heard awesome things from a lot of people. So back in the 70s or even early 80s, how many times a week were you performing? Were there open mics? Could you get on stage often? Or was this strictly just getting booked for, shows at these dinner theaters and whatnot? Were there other comics in the area that, enough to form a scene?
No, not at all. I was with Julie for 2 years, and she would, when she wasn't touring or opening for one of the bigger name folks, and I got to meet people like Joey Bishop and Danny Thomas and these classic legends really of the 50s and 60s. And when I would go up and do my 5-6 minutes, and it would be maybe once a month. And after 2 years, I just loved it. I wasn't making great money, but the comedy clubs were just starting to open up in Philadelphia. There was Grandma Minnie's. There was the Comedy Cabaret. I believe they were the only two, at least at that time.
Comedy Cabaret that's around now? Andy Scarpati?
I don't think so. It's the one Tommy Moore used to be the manager of.
Okay, because when I started doing stand-up 18 years ago, there were 8 comedy cabarets, and now I think there's 2. Doylestown and then in the Northeast on Route 1 on the Boulevard.
Right. So in those days, it was the Gong Show was big on TV. And it was probably before you were even born. But the idea that America's Got Talent with a judge that didn't care if you moved on to the next round, there's this big Chinese gong behind them. And if they didn't like you, you basically got 15 seconds to win or lose an audience. And every comedy club that was opening, and they were beginning to just explode across the country, they all picked up that model of the Gong Show. And it was brutal. It was brutal because they would just gong you for no reason. The one night when I was at Grandma Minnie's, I believe I was act number 32 out of 35.
Oh, man. I've been there. I know what it's like to perform.
It was like 11:15 at night. Everybody that was in the audience came to see their friends. As their friends were on, everybody left. I had like 6 people left. Told my first joke, and And like the guy picked up the hammer, and I was like, never mind, I'm done. I didn't even get to my second joke. But you did that. I went anywhere, anytime, just to be in front of an audience. So, my friend Julie would start to encourage me to go to Girl Scout groups and Rotary clubs and any place that, hey, we got this guy, he's kind of funny. And I started to speak at all kinds of different groups just to get on a stage. You just can't beat stage time anywhere.
No matter what decade you started in or whatever, when you start, you grind and you'll perform anywhere. I mean, I have performed in dive bars, in bowling alleys. I've performed next to a pool table while people were still playing pool. I mean, in your early days, you will perform anywhere, even if it's a pretty crappy situation.
Yeah. I've done prisons. I've done 2 shows on a diving board over empty swimming pools at Central Park, New York.
That sounds pretty dangerous.
Yeah. There was actually boys skateboarding below me in the empty pool, but they were doing this big community fair. And I was standing on a diving board over an empty pool. I've been in prisons, and the one time a guy in front of me.
You're like the Johnny Cash of comics.
Yeah, the guy pulled down his pants and mooned me in the middle of the show, and the guards came and pulled him out. And it's like,
did that make you laugh?
It did. And then again, I do a lot of stuff in churches. So I have that line of where do I cross? How do you make a comment when a guy moons you? I forget what I said now, but I was going
to say, what was your recovery line? I mean, that's a situation where you have to say, you can't not acknowledge that.
Yeah, no. I said something like, you really cracked me up. And I'm glad he was facing the other way. And I made maybe a mention of his limited manhood or something, but the whole crowd roared. They roared.
So you do perform in churches. I want to talk about that because that's definitely a unique angle. How would you describe your comedy? Like, I've read your bio and, I'm familiar with your work, but how do you describe what you do?
Well, I think when I advertise, I say I'm a clean, family-friendly comedian. So I love inspirational comedy. I do stories. Within the group that I'm a part of, the CCA, the Christian Comedy Association, there's about 400 of us.
Okay, that was my next question. That many, huh?
Yeah. Again, not all are funny, and some are learning and growing. But we have some that do nothing but women events. That's a huge thing the last 10 years. These women of faith, girls' night out, a thing called Aspire. They're packing out places like Wells Fargo with 20,000 women. Wow. And they have a series of 10 different women who are the comedians that travel with that group.
Pierce, is she one of them?
Yes. Yeah. Shonda and I started together in this comedy world of Christian comedy in 94.
Okay.
I got to meet her, and we've done a lot of stuff together over the years.
I've been watching her work since I was a kid. Ever since I was a very, very young kid, I remember seeing her on TV. So even when I take, going back 30 plus years, I was familiar with her work because my dad would watch stand up on television.
Yeah. Many people don't know, but she is the best-selling female comedian of all time. More than Joan Rivers, more than Phyllis Diller, more than Lily Tomlin, more than Moms Mabley. If you go back to the old albums, she has hit a niche, and again, my style would be a male version of what she does. It's a lot of comedy with stories and great laughs, and then somewhere in there's a hook to try to introduce some kind of truth or a spiritual point to her message. She's the best at it.
She is awesome. So with your act, you say clean and inspirational and everything. You perform for people of all ages, teenagers to the elderly. Do you have a favorite demographic, or is an audience an audience?
Yeah, no, not at all. It's when I'm mentoring a number of young comedians right now, and the number one rule is find that voice, your personality. Number 2 is know your audience.
Yes,
And when I'm doing, I do a lot at 55 plus communities. They are a great place to practice. They don't pay great overall, but once or twice a month, I go and I speak all over this Philadelphia area. And so they like stories. They like God, family, country stuff. Mm-hmm. When I do colleges, and I speak at a few colleges a year, they're into political, they're into sarcasm, they're into anger. So you have to change your setup. And a lot of comedians can't do that. High schools, I speak at a high school once a month because I travel with this ministry group, and they go in to talk about teen suicide and some other issues. So I use comedy to share some of my own struggles when I was in high school, and some answers to give kids some hope, and let them know that there is something else out there, and that it's just amazing. But kids respond even though I'm a grandfather, I have a lot of kids. Part of my story, my wife and I were told we could not have kids. So we took in 3 boys off the streets of South Philly, homeless, abandoned street kids, just heartbreaking stories. But that eventually evolved into 24 different people have lived with us over the last 30 years.
That's absolutely wild.
And in the midst of this, God showed he had a sense of humor and blessed us with 5 miracle birth kids. And my tagline is, we had 4 before the doctors told me what was causing it.
Oh, that's 24
that's my dirtiest. That's my dirtiest joke.
That's is that your closer?
No. That's really kind of the opener. That's kind of the opener.
Either way, it's such a hard hitting joke to either do up the top or at the end. So with 24 kids or people of all ages coming through the house, that's got to be an endless source of material, right?
Yeah, I would say 70 to 80% of my act is real life stuff that happens right here. Mm-hmm. Part of that story, and amongst the kids, and we had 13 at once. We didn't have all 24 at once, and it just kind of rotated. But during that time, the local prison here in good old Glen Mills, they called my church and said, could anybody watch prisoners while they await trial? So my wife and I got involved with this in-house arrest program, and we took in 2 convicts for a year under house arrest. And I was showing, I carry a photo album with me, and I show a picture of all my kids. And one of the people at my table looked and said, which 2 are the convicts? And I said, without the ankle bracelet, you can't tell. It's so that real life comment turned into one of my best lines.
That's where the best material comes from. Yeah. I'm 38. My parents are getting older. My stepdad's the best guy in the whole world, and like half my act is about him right now because he does inadvertently hilarious stuff all the time. I'll just be watching him. I'll just be observing him going about his day, and I'll notice 10 things that I find hilarious that he doesn't even know he's doing.
Right.
And then I'm talking about it that night.
My second favorite joke is fairly new. I was picking up a comedian at the airport, David Farrell. He's out of South Carolina, was the Clean Comedian of the Year in 2007, I believe, does great sound effects, voices, impersonations. He's a ball of energy. He's in his 50s now, and he's just brilliant. I picked him up. We went out to breakfast. And so he said, so what's going on in your life? I said, well, I'm a little concerned. My daughter came home from college. She's only 19. And she asked if she could get married. And I said, quite honestly, I'm a little concerned because the boy she likes, there's a 10-year age difference. And he didn't even blink. He said, what? He's 9? And it's like, and I literally spit out my pancakes. And it's become one of my favorite jokes. And I do a lot of jokes about each one of my kids. I do jokes about it. And that daughter is my funniest kid. So I love telling stories about her. And then I lead up to that. What? He's 9?
Do you write often? Like, what's your process like for putting your act together?
Yeah, I am super blessed, but I am not disciplined. I'm blessed in that I generally get to do 2-3 shows a week. I do about 120 to 150 shows a year. And it's become my full-time job since 2007. COVID really put a dent in that, but I had 6 shows last week. So I don't have time to write. What I do is I try to introduce a new joke every show.
Okay.
And if it works, I put it between 2 of my A. You have your A material and your
Absolutely.
B material.
You have to sandwich it in between stuff.
I sandwich it in between. So if it works, the next show I'm going to add a tagline, and hopefully within 6 months I'm going to have 3 new good minutes.
That is such a simple way to do it, but I feel like, and I'm guilty of this as well, I don't always do that. I'm trying to make it more of a point now to try one new joke every single show. It sounds so simple in theory, yet I don't do it as often as I should. No. I've gotten better with it in 2023 this year on my shows, but I would say I really suck at that, being totally honest.
It's hard just to pop something into, like, speaking of elephants, but Chris Rock had an interesting interview about your jokes are like little soldiers, and it's not enough to have them out there. You got to put them in the right order. And there's been some debate, but to me, order is very important because I lay out a set list for every show I do. And a little tip for you, or maybe some of the younger guys out there, is my first 6 to 8 minutes is a commercial of where I've been.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than come out and hit them with your best joke or your second best joke, and I know a lot of folks debate over that, I come out, thank people for having me, and say, I'm glad to be here tonight. I was just in Minnesota, or I was just here. And I do 6 minutes of jokes of where I've been. And so I have Sven and Ole jokes for my Minnesota people. I was just at a teen conference, and I'll do a teen joke. The other week I was doing an all-black church, which kind of goes back to your question, which I never answered, my favorite audience. Black Pentecostal women. That's the holy of holies for because
that sounds uproarious and very well dressed.
Yes, because black people laugh more than white people. Pentecostals laugh more than Baptists, and women laugh statistically. Women laugh 7 times more than men. So I do a fair number of women's groups, and they are just tremendous.
That's really funny that you say that. I started in a black comedy club, and I absolutely loved it. Actually, it was the Laugh House on South Street, which David Brenner, I believe, owned in the 80s when it was the Funny Bone.
Sure.
Yep. It became the Laugh House, LAFF, and that's where I got started. And for the first 2 years or so, 95% of my open mics and shows were in front of black audiences, and I absolutely loved it.
And they make you think you're funnier than you are because they laugh so much, and then they tell the joke you told to the person sitting right next to them, like they did you hear what he said? Did you hear? And they will tell the joke 3 more times so that an 8-second laugh becomes 30 because.
And then that's when you start laughing. At least I do, because the situation gets so not out of control, but gets carried so far away. You just naturally start laughing. There's nothing like it.
No, it's wonderful.
I am a big fan. I love, I'm going to cut right to it. I'm a big fan of a horror story. So is there anything in your arsenal that you can remember from a night that was just pure hell for any reason? Because I mean, it doesn't really matter how seasoned we are, or, sometimes, there's that night out there that's going to get you. So I was wondering if you have 1 or 2 quick little...
I have 10, but the one that stands out more than any other is I got off.
That's the one I want to hear. Then.
I got off a plane, and my wife picks me up, and I went right from a plane in the morning to go to honor the police. It was Police Appreciation Day in Philly. So they had set up this beautiful luncheon. 500 police officers are there. And I walk into this place, and it is silent. It is silent. And I said to the director, "What's going on?" He said, "Well, you didn't hear?" And I said, "Hear what?" I said, "I just got off a plane." He said, "Officer Gary Skursky was shot yesterday right outside this church." And we were in this giant church that was hosting this appreciation night. And I go in there, and these guys are mourning over a brother that has fallen. And they ring, "Hey, folks, hey, the lunch is over. Make your way upstairs. We're going to have our entertainment."
Oh, man.
I go upstairs into a church. And again, even though I do a lot of church programs, I have a rule. The more stained glass and the more pipes in the organ, the less likely they'll laugh.
That is so specific, but I can picture exactly what you're talking about.
So I go to this old grand church with the major and minor pulpits, and on the stage is an easel with a picture of Officer Skursky and a candle. And the guy said, "Welcome, guys. We want to make you and thank you for what you do. By the way, his mother, dad, and his brother and his children are in the front row. They lost their dad yesterday, and they're in the front row weeping." And he said, they said, "And now for our comedy entertainment." So it was horrible. It was horrible.
Did they laugh? Was anybody on your side, or was you just thrown to the wolves?
Well, because and not many people know this, but I also spent some time as a pastor. As my one buddy said, it was the toughest 2 weeks of my life. I don't fit in well in the typical pastor role. But I said, "Folks, if I could switch hats and be a pastor for a few minutes, let me say some words of comfort to the family." And I did. And then I turned to the officers and said, "I really look forward to this event. I really appreciate what you do. I was going to tell you about the cop who did this, this, and this." And they listened. And I said, "And if you laughed at that, I was going to tell you the joke about the officer who did this." Mm-hmm. And they started to smile. And 4 jokes in, I started to get them laughing. And just as it was kind of becoming normal, you heard this beep, boop, beep, boop, beep, boop. And there was a red alert. 200 of the 500 cops got up and ran out of the building because there was a riot, because it was a high school graduation and two competing high schools were graduating at the same place, one after the other. And when they crossed paths, it turned into a street war. And it was on the news that night. All these high school kids in a giant riot. So that would be my worst booking ever.
I would hope nothing would be worse than that in your career. Did the family of the slain officer eventually start laughing?
Yeah. When everyone left, the sergeant came up and explained what was going on. And then he said, sorry, we broke up your show. But this is what we do. And now go ahead, finish your show. It was like starting all over again. It just
people don't even realize that once the momentum has been broken, it's like next to impossible to get back for any reason. Even if a server drops a tray and you get taken in that direction because there's a distraction, there's commotion, there's sounds of glass breaking. It takes the momentum out. But that's something on a whole nother level.
Yeah, I get asked a lot. Yeah, because I do a lot of banquets. Can we have an intermission in your show? And I'm like, please no.
Absolutely not.
No bathroom breaks. And most times, if you ever do banquets, the dinner almost always runs late. And then the director or the host will turn to me and say, would you mind going up while they eat dessert? And just get started. We're running a little behind. And it's in my contract in capital letters and underlined. Please, please, please do not ask me to perform when people are eating. It does not work.
I've been there a million times as well. So you mentioned being a pastor. Now, when you were giving sermons and whatnot, were you funny with that too? Did you always incorporate humor into it?
It was never a plan, but it's kind of the ways I know God wanted me to be funny is even when I would preach about serious stuff, people would laugh. I would say and do things without even thinking. And I still, honestly, I get to speak or preach in churches almost every week. I fly about 30 times a year. And whenever I go to a city, I just go online and I look up churches and say, hey, I'm coming for this event. While I'm there, would you like me to come speak at your church? And once they check my website out or they see some videos, I get to preach about 30 times a year. And I almost always preach on the subject of joy in this world with so much bad news and other stuff. It's I call it how to beat the blahs or how to defeat depression or how to jumpstart your joy. I have different titles, but it's basically the same message I give over and over again.
Are you your own manager? Do you do all your own bookings and all your own travel coordination? Because I do that for me. I 100% do everything myself when it comes to my dates and performing.
I have been, I don't want to seem too preachy, but I am so blessed. In 2004, 5, 6, somewhere in there, I got signed by the Ambassador Speakers Bureau in Nashville. So it's the major leagues in the clean or Christian comedy world. So they handle everything. They negotiate my fee. They arrange my travel. They get me picked up with limos. I get a per diem for food. After 30 years of doing Girl Scouts, Cub Scouts, Rotary clubs, and hey, we got $100 and you can have lunch. It's like, wow, thanks. I am in a very different world the last 15 years, and I really enjoy it. I don't think if you spent 30 years or 20 years in your case paying your dues, you appreciate it a whole lot more.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a grind for everybody, myself and all my friends. And, success happens at different rates and in different ways, but you never know what's around the corner. But it's a grind for sure. And there's definitely specific shows and nights and weekends where it pays off and you're on stage and you stop for a second and just take it in.
Yep.
Being like, wow, this is actually pretty cool.
I'm getting paid to do this. I start most of my programs that way, how much I appreciate being there and getting to do that. And my agreement with them, just for folks, because I'm not sure how big your audience space is across the country, but my agreement with Ambassador is that I can do anything within 2 hours of my home on my own. So I'll probably do 40, 50 shows for the assisted living places, for area stuff. I do a lot of what I call hilarity for charity. I do a lot of fundraisers. And just by example, I just did one about a month ago in Lancaster, PA, the home of the Amish, and
Yep.
it was to raise money for an Amish Ronald McDonald House. I've done them for Habitat for Humanity, American Cancer Society. I've helped couples adopt children doing fundraisers. I've done some
Wow.
parents who have had children with disabilities. We'll do a fundraiser and let's buy an electric wheelchair, which are several $1,000s, or a special needs van that has the ramp so that a wheelchair can get in.
Wow.
I do about 30 to 50 of those a year. And I not only love to do comedy, but when you can combine that with doing something good for someone, a town that was just hit by a flood or a hurricane.
Or a family that needs any sort of financial assistance or anything.
House fire, someone laid off. The list over my 20 years is extensive, but super, super fun.
That's awesome. I love hearing it because comedy's one thing, but when you're able to help people with it, it takes it to a whole nother level.
It surely does.
I was on your website earlier this morning and I found something that stood out to me in your bio. You mentioned dropping your notes in an open grave.
Oh, yes.
I would love to hear this story if you don't mind.
It was my closer. It was my closer for 15 years because it is a true story.
That's why it's funny. The funniest stuff is the true stuff.
And again, for your audience to appreciate my physical appearance, I do a lot of skinny jokes. I'm so skinny that, if I was a centerfold, I get lost in a crease. I'm so skinny that, and I have a whole series because when I graduated high school, I was 6'3", 119. So very, very thin. And so I do a lot about that, body shaming, self-image when I speak to high schools. But my mother-in-law would be my opposite. And that's kind of my lead into the funeral story.
Okay.
And so without fat shaming anybody or talking, I have a series of jokes of how big my mother-in-law was. Remember Rodney Dangerfield? My mother-in-law, she was so fat, her belly button had an echo. I'm telling you, she was a big woman. She was a big woman. Her underwear didn't say BVD. It said Boulevard. I'm telling you, she was a big woman.
Oh, yeah. So, I'm a huge Dangerfield fan.
So I'm a terrible impersonator, but that's a good joke. So, but truly, 2 years after we were married, my mother-in-law at age 46 died very suddenly. And I go through some of that, basically, that some things in life are not funny, but funny things can happen even in the midst of tragedy. And again, I'll shrink down my 12-minute story to say, basically, the ambulance crew showed up to take the body away, and they couldn't get her off the bed. We're talking defensive tackle. We're talking 400 pounds. We're talking a big person. Mm-hmm. So they came into the living room and asked me and a relative if we could help carry the body out. And I'd never done this before, but we picked up the body bag, took 3 steps, and boom, we dropped her on the floor so loud. And immediately I responded. I didn't even think. I said, wow, this is dead weight. And these ambulance crew, they started laughing. And then we get to the steps and we're thinking, how are we going to get her down the steps? And I looked down and I thought, if she's dead, she can't feel anything. One good shove and we could save a lot of work here.
That's hysterical.
I act out the whole story and several things happen. But to get right to the graveside, I'm now a brand new pastor. I'm newly married. I'm standing over an empty hole. All the families gathered under the little tent. I had written out all my notes and prayers out of a pastoral handbook because I wanted to be this serious, compassionate pastor. And when everyone closed their eyes and bowed their head for my opening prayer, I opened my Bible and all my notes blew out right into the hole. It was like, and everyone's waiting for this prayer. And I have one of those laughs. I don't make noise. I just head bob and then I can't breathe. Because when I get laughing, I started gasping like, I can't believe I did it. And everyone starts crying because they think I'm upset over my mother-in-law. And I'm actually laughing because my notes were at the bottom of the grave.
That is one of the funniest things I have ever heard in mine. That is so unfortunate and also equally as amazing.
Yeah. It's on my first DVD. Yeah. And honestly, I haven't told it.
Them? Like,
pardon me?
Did you go and get them?
No. There's more to the story. I ended up, just reading my Bible. I was like, wow, that doesn't make sense. And it's actually a setup because I read some of the funny things that are in Scripture that have nothing to do with funerals. So I've added that as part of the story. That's kind of embellishment. But
my God. I picture like one of the landscaper ground crew guys like coming in with a rake and trying to like
get them all.
reach for it.
Oh no. Yeah. So that is a true story. And I don't think I've told it in 10 years because I have some new closers that I use now. And I was at an event recently, and the pastor at this event said, "Hey, you didn't tell your funeral story." So I actually got to do an encore. I came back up and I said, "Well, I haven't done this in years, but how many comedians ever do an encore?" That was pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. Was the momentum still there?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
good. So
it was a great night.
Oh, awesome. Gordon, thank you for being here. I really enjoyed talking to you, hearing your story, and all the positivity you bring out of comedy. So thank you for being here. And one last thing, you mentioned an open mic at your church. Where is this church, and when can I pop by and do some time?
Yes, we do. The first Friday of each month. My church is called the Foundry Church. It's in Wallingford, Garden City, Brookhaven area, so it's not far. It is the first Friday of every month. And we have some singers. We have a couple of young comedians. We have, it's really open to anyone. People do some poetry readings. And we might have 30 people. We might have 70 to 100. It varies each month.
Wow.
But it's part of our church philosophy is that we want to encourage people to use their gifts, and arts are just an incredible way to communicate.
Well, I'll definitely meet you there one night. I would love to meet you in person and say hey, and then do a set with you.
That would be great.
All right, everybody, Gordon Douglas, thank you for being here.
It's been my pleasure.